Hey man, it's Mason here, and I've got some announcements for you guys tonight. We've got a lot of things to go over, so make sure you're kind of paying attention to all of this. But the first thing is, I want to talk to you guys about reopening and getting back together as a group, meeting in person. So we had hopes last week. I kind of semi-announced in the chat that we were going to try to do that tonight. We've decided to hold off a little bit and to move it to July 1st. We're going to be aiming for July 1st to be our first in-person meeting. So middle school would be from 6 to 7:30, high school would be from 7 to 9. And the important thing you need to know is that it's gonna be outdoors, because we found that outdoors is a lot safer in terms of just the spread of coronavirus, all that kind of stuff. We are gonna ask that you guys wear a mask, you socially distance, so avoid hugging one another, all that kind of stuff. We're gonna still be playing games, still be doing worship, all that kind of stuff. It's just all gonna be socially distanced and appropriate. So mark your calendars for that. That's when we're gonna be meeting in person again. But for the next couple weeks, we're gonna continue to be online at 6:30 and then followed afterwards with Zoom. So more information about all that stuff is going to come out in the next kind of week or two. So just keep an eye out. Make sure you're tuning into all of our social channels. However, in the meantime, we do want to try to get together at least in some fashion. And so instead of kind of putting it on Wednesday night and then making you choose about whether you feel safe or not to come out, what we've decided to do is do a worship night this Sunday. Okay, this Sunday, the 14th, at 6 o'clock here at the church out on the field. It's just going to be worship. That's all it's going to be. And it's just going to be for high school. Okay, so just high schoolers. However, if you just graduated 8th grade and you're moving up into high school next year, you are welcome to come to this. You are officially in high school as of tonight. And I'll get to that in a second. But this Sunday, 6 p.m., just a worship night. We're going to do a few songs together. It's not going to last super long, but just a time for us to be able to get together, see one another in a safe and socially distanced way. So if you're coming to that, first off, bring a mask and bring a lawn chair, something to kind of sit on unless you want to just sit on the lawn. But I recommend bringing a lawn chair. We hope to see you this Sunday for that. Another in-person thing that we're doing is on June 23rd, we're launching our high school girls and guys Bible studies. Okay, 6 p.m. on Tuesday nights. We've done this every year, every summer. They're gonna look a little different this year, at least definitely for the guys group. Won't be able to play Tiger Ball at the gym, but don't worry, we're still gonna be able to play some games together, and then we're gonna dive deep into some Bible studies together. They are seriously like one of the highlights of my summer. If you're in high school or going into high school, please join us on Tuesdays from 6 to 8 p.m. And there'll be more information about that next week as well. Now, let me take a little pause, and I want to welcome in our brand new 6th grade class. Okay, throw it up in the chat right now. Let them know that they are welcome, that we're so glad that they're here. Normally, we've got big time to kind of welcome in that class and get them used to Emmaus, and we don't have that right now. So instead, we just want to make them feel so welcome. So throw it in the chat. 6th graders, we are so glad that you're here. We're going to be getting you guys in a small group later. We can't wait to meet you, and we look forward to actually being able to see you in person again one day. So I mentioned that 6th grade class coming in. If you just finished 8th grade, you're now officially in high school. You're going into high school small groups tonight. So when you jump in the Zoom chat later, we're going to throw you into some groups, and we can't wait for you to join us in there. And the last thing that I have to let you guys know about, D-Team applications are out, okay? Down in the description below, you can click on the link and get the D-Team application. If you don't know what that is, it is for both our worship team and our serve team. Now, worship team, kind of obvious. You're going to be on the worship team. Worship team is for middle school and high school, and you can apply to be on that team starting for next year. High school, we also have another team called the serve team, which is a way for you to go deeper in your faith and help create the community here at Emmaus. It's the community that's been holding us together through all of this stuff going on. So fill out those applications. They're going to be due probably around the end of July as we're still trying to kind of figure things out. So get those into us as soon as you can. And with that being said, we're diving into a new series tonight. Now listen, we made a little bit of a change. Kayla mentioned last week that we're going to start our jukebox series tonight. We're actually going to postpone that just a little bit, mainly because we're afraid we'll have our whole video taken down for copyright issues. So when we meet in person, we're going to launch the jukebox series. Instead, right now we're doing a series called Overcomers, which is based on the book of Elijah. And we're doing this with all of Bayside students, which is so cool that we're joining every single Bayside campus for students to jump into this series. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Kayla, and I'll see you guys soon.
Hey Emmaus, welcome back to this week. We have a new series this week and it's called Overcomers. So the next 3 weeks we're going to be going through this series where we're looking at the story of Elijah. In full disclosure, as I'm giving this talk, I'm not going to be using my left hand because this. So yesterday I was cutting a mango because I wanted a snack in the afternoon and then life got me. So I spent 3 hours in the emergency room yesterday and in a little pain today, so that's no fun. And really what I learned from yesterday is I hate waiting. Waiting in the emergency room, actually especially during COVID when no one else can be with you, is not fun. I went in, thought it was going to be some simple stitches, but then the doctor was like, I need to have the specialist look at you because you might have cut through a tendon. I was like, great. That means surgery and other things, but what happened is I ended up waiting like 2 hours to see the specialist. So I was almost in and out with stitches, and then instead I had to wait for 2 hours. It's okay though, it turns out that I didn't cut a tendon, and so that's good news. Got stitched up, got 5 stitches, and am healing now. But I learned that I don't like waiting. Right? And for most of us, waiting is not fun or enjoyable or ideal or how we want to spend our time. We wait in lines, we wait at stoplights, we wait for our food to be ready. Sometimes we feel like we wait an eternity for someone to text us back. And if you're like me when I was younger, I was always waiting on my mom to finish conversations with other adults when I just wanted to go home, especially after church, wanted lunch, whatever it was. And right now, in this time, we're waiting for COVID-19 to go away so we can get back to a normal, right? We're waiting to meet in person together. And if I'm going to be honest with you guys, when COVID first came around and quarantine first started, I felt like life was on pause. I felt like someone grabbed a remote, hit pause on my life, and I was just kind of waiting patiently for someone to hit play again before I thought anything important could occur in my life. So while I thought that way, I kind of just waited in my misery a little bit, complaining about life while I waited. And yet, here we are, still sheltered in place 3 months later. What if during that whole shelter in place, I had thought this way, that my life was on pause, and I just sat around waiting for something to change or happen and thought life was actually on pause? Would have been a waste of time, right? And it took me a while to realize this, but life is not on pause right now. Life is happening all around me, and God is working and moving, and if I'm not careful, I'm going to miss it. So today I want to make sure that you guys don't fall into the trap that I did at the beginning of quarantine. And so we're talking about how we don't want to waste a season of waiting. It's kind of the topic of tonight, is don't waste a season of waiting. Let's be real honest. We're all waiting right now to be able to have life go back to some sort of normal. That much is true. And the lie, though, and the waste of time in this waiting is choosing to believe that there's not life to be lived even in the waiting. 3 weeks, Emmaus. It's 3 weeks until we meet together in person, socially distanced and everything, but we have 3 weeks. Don't waste this season, the next 3 weeks of waiting, but instead choose to be an overcomer. Overcome the season of waiting. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at Elijah. He's a prophet from the Old Testament who he himself found himself in a season of waiting. Right? And so we're going to look at his story to figure out how we can approach this season of waiting long term and the next 3 weeks. And so we're looking at 1 Kings chapter 17. And this is when Elijah is introduced, and he was a prophet sent from God to Israel. Right? And a prophet was someone chosen by God to speak for God to his people. And his people was the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. And God sent Elijah because the king in power, King Ahab, had promoted worship of other gods in the land of Israel. Now you've heard of the 10 Commandments, right? And that first commandment is that Israel, we should have no other gods above Yahweh, above the Lord. Right? So Ahab was not leading his people well and living for the Lord in this time. So Elijah comes along to tell Ahab and Israel that there's going to be a drought coming because of their disobedience and their idolatry of these other idols and gods. And Israel in the Old Testament has this pattern of disobedience or sin that leads to God's judgment, and then eventually God delivers them from their sin, and Israel worships and serves the Lord, and then eventually it happens again. There's disobedience and sin. And this is the cycle that's going on. So right now, Israel is facing that judgment from the Lord, and there's a drought coming. So we pick up in 1 Kings 17. And it says, Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there. So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan, and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him. Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. See, Elijah was obedient. He delivered the message of the Lord, and then God provided for him. Elijah entered into a season of waiting for the drought to end and for Israel to be delivered from their sin. And he found himself next to a brook where God was providing for him. But a strange thing happened. Elijah had to move on even in the midst of his waiting. This is our first point, is don't spend your waiting in the wrong place. See, the Lord had provided where Elijah was in his waiting, but it was time to move on. And not move on from his time of waiting altogether. He was still waiting for the drought to end and for Israel to be delivered from their sin. But he had to move on to another purpose. Right? You see, if we aren't careful, we can get stuck in a season as life changes all around us. And that place can bring destruction and doubt and drought. We feel like God's not there because he's moving on. He wants us to move on to what he has next. And in our season of waiting, God can ask us to move, to act, to keep pressing forward, even in the times where we're waiting. Right? But sometimes out of our stubbornness or even our fear, we get stuck in a place where that was once blessed by God. Like, God is with us. This is where he was with us. But if we stay there once God wants us to move forward, we find ourselves dried out looking for God. I had an overall great high school experience. I loved my high school, and especially the last couple of years, and I wanted more than anything to stay in high school. Some of you might think that's crazy, some of you get me, but I wanted to put off college as long as I could. And part of this was because all my friends were a year younger than me, and I wanted more than anything to stay there and go through that last year with them, and not have to wait, enter a season of waiting for them to catch up to the stage of life that I was in. But the thing is, movement was important. I couldn't wait back in high school. I had to move on to the next purpose that God had in my life. I wanted to wait for my friends to catch up with me, but I had to move on. And we can't live our life in fear during the waiting, but instead we have to live by faith. And that's trusting God that where he is leading us forward is good, and not trusting just in the fact of where he has led us before. See, we have to remember that once we moved on at one point or another, God was faithful then when we moved on to that point. So he's going to be faithful in the future for where he's moving us now, even in the seasons of waiting. But guess what? Even in those seasons, we have purpose. Seasons of waiting have purpose. Let's look at Elijah's story and kind of how it continues forward. It says, So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I might have a drink? As she was going to get it, he called, And bring me, please, a piece of bread. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm getting a few sticks to take home to make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. It says, Elijah said to her, Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, But first, make a small loaf of bread for me, from what you have, and bring it to me, and then make some for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day of the Lord sends rain on the land." She went away and did as Elijah told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Guys, seasons of waiting have purpose. But we have to lean into them and be obedient to that purpose. My dad and I have this saying that we talk about in times of life where I kind of feel like we're just trudging through life, not really feeling a lot of purpose, kind of just not really knowing what to do, and sometimes that's in seasons of waiting, and it's called going through the motions. That's what we talk about. It's I just feel like I'm going through the motions in life right now. And it's I wake up, I live my day, but I don't find a lot of purpose in it. I don't really know where I'm moving forward or if I'm moving backward. I'm just going through the motions, and that happens a lot in seasons of waiting. But the thing is we can't just go through the motions. We have to press into that and live the motions and actually live life. And the best way to do that is to be present. It's kind of a bonus point. It's purpose begins with presence. Right? We have to be present in where the Lord is working in our life. We have to be present with where God has us, even in a time of waiting. We have to be present with the people that God has put in our life, and watch God work and move in those relationships, in your job, in school, with your family. God is still moving and has purpose, even in the times of waiting. And we can't just go through the motions. We have to live and press into it. And part of that is being present in what's happening. And there, when we're present, we find purpose. Because guys, there's purpose in all seasons of life, even in the times of waiting. And Elijah discovered this too. I'm just going to kind of summarize the end of the story. Basically, the son of the widow got sick at one point, and he was dying. And Elijah took the son, and he stretched out 3 times in front of the Lord, asking for him to heal the son. And the son lived. Resurrection happened because of Elijah's obedience and his presence and purpose, even in the times of waiting. The drought wasn't over, Israel hadn't been delivered yet, but there's purpose, and Elijah chose to be present and obedient to what God had for him there. Sometimes it doesn't feel like God is working or is with you in times of waiting. I get that. Seasons of waiting sometimes feel lonely or purposeless, but the thing is sometimes even when we're confused or abandoned, we don't feel close to God in those times. But like Elijah, even when it doesn't feel like God is working in you in those times, he can still be working through you. Even when it doesn't feel like God is working in you, he can still work through you. But only if you let him. You have to be ready. You can't waste a season of waiting. Don't sit still. Don't go through the motions, but be present. Know your purpose, and then watch God move through you, even in seasons of waiting. It's just a simple prayer of surrender and trust, even in those times that feel unknown. And so I just want to pray with you guys before we go into small groups, just that God would continue to use us, even in a season of waiting. Would you guys pray with me? God, thank you that there's purpose in every season of life. And God, even the ones that feel lonely and confusing because we're just waiting for something to happen, God, I ask that you would spark in us a desire to see purpose in what's happening around us, even while we're waiting for a big picture thing to end. Even while we're waiting for the coronavirus to go away, God, there's still life to be lived. There's things that you want to do through us and also in us. And so I just ask that you would help bring purpose into our lives and for us to open our eyes and our minds and see what's around us, see the purpose that you have and be a part of it. God, it's not easy to be in a season of waiting, but you are still faithful in that, and you're still leading us somewhere, even as we're waiting kind of still. God, help us not just go through the motions, but help us to live into the purpose you have for us. We love you, and we thank you for being with us, even in seasons of waiting. In your name we pray. Amen. Awesome. Thanks for joining tonight. Go ahead and click on the link below to join the Zoom call and get into your small groups. Have a good night, guys.